Alright, you picture this. You take the championship leader, his own teammate, and three other world class riders. You try them and squeeze them into the single corner on lap 1. What could possibly go wrong, right? Absolute carnage, that's what. We had 5 bikes sliding into the dirt even before the race could even catch its breath. 3 of them were Aprilias, and the guy who pulled the trigger, 2024 world champion Jorge Martin. And while everyone else was busy sweeping up the wreckage at turn 1, Marc Marquez, he was already checking out, riding straight into the history books. Welcome back to the Art of Motor Racing, guys. I'm Akshay. And honestly, round 8 in Hungary was easily one of those craziest, most chaotic, and totally avoidable races we've seen all year. By the time the checkered flag dropped, we watched a legend do something only 2 other riders in the history of this sport has ever achieved.
Perez goes off the track, off goes Leclerc, through goes Hamilton!
Let's break down how Aprilia went from looking like absolute kings to accidentally setting their own garage on fire. And before we get into the heavy racing stuff, a quick shout out to the guys who are still on the mends after that brutal weekend in Barcelona. Alex Marquez was still out after his nasty crash in Catalonia, so Iker Lecuona, he filled in for him at Corsini Ducati. Johan Zarco is also sidelined, which brought Cal Crutchlow back into the LCR Honda lineup. After everything we saw in Spain, I'm just incredibly glad we're talking about recovery times and not something way worse. So now, as for Sunday's Turn 1 pileup as well, both Jorge Martin and Marco Bezzecchi, they had to go straight to the medical center. Take a massive sigh of relief because thankfully there are no broken bones. Martin has some nasty bruises on his back and right foot, and Bezzecchi's leg and hand were pretty banged up as well. But they walked away. At the end of the day, you can always score more championship points, but seeing the guys walk away from a hit like that, that's all that really matters. Now let's go back and talk about the track because Ballison Park is a completely different beast compared to Mugello. Mugello, it was fast, flowing, and majestic. It feels like the bikes are just carving up the hills. Peloton, man, it's tight, twisty, and hyper technical. It's barely 4 kilometers long, and there's no massive straightway where you can just pin the throttle and let the bike do the work. Here, you have to be precise, you have to be patient, and you have to wrestle the bike through start and stop corners over and over again. If you show up into turn 1 with way too much ego and zero grip, this place will instantly punish you. And to make things even wilder, they partially resurfaced the track right before the weekend. That brand new tarmac, it had absolutely zero grip, turning the main braking zone into a literal ice rink. Oh, and here's the hilarious part. While MotoGP was dealing with this, Formula One, it was racing at Monaco on the exact same weekend. So, motorsport fans basically got an ultimate good luck overtaking double feature. In Monaco, you had 22 F1 cars politely driving in a single fine line like they're waiting for a fancy table at a restaurant. And over in Hungary, you had a track where if you don't make your move stick, you might as well just send the guy in front a formal email asking him for permission to pass. Qualifying is everything here, and if you get stuck behind someone who knows how to park a bike on the racing line, your afternoon turns into a total hostage situation. So, right from the Friday, you could tell the track was waiting to bite someone. Practice, it belonged entirely to Pedro Costa. He had that KTM absolutely singing, clearing the rest of the grid by nearly half a second. And meanwhile, Marc Marquez, he was just chilling on 7th on a heavily used medium tire. It was that quiet, calculated vibe that usually means he's planning something big. Well, come Saturday, qualifying. That slick turn 1 tarmac, it claimed its first victim. Marc Marquez, he washed his front end and crashed during Q2. And literally moments later, Fabio Di Giannantonio, he went down the exact same spot. It was complete chaos. But Marc being Marc, he ran back to the garage, hopped on his number 93 factory Ducati, and on the closing seconds of the session, pulled an absolute rabbit out of the hat. 1 minute 36.7. Boom. Pole position. Pedro Costa, he missed out on pole by just 5 hundredths. That's not a gap, guys. That's a sneeze. Herman Aldiger, he locked down the front final spot on the front row. DJ recovered for fourth, and Pecco Bagnaia fought through Q1 to get fifth, while Bezecchi and Martin were stuck back in sixth, eighth. Well, you could already see cracks forming for Aprilia. And Mugello, they looked like an unstoppable machine. And at Hungary, they looked like they were still trying to figure out the puzzle while Marc Marquez was already walking away with the answer sheet. Then came Saturday, the sprint race, and Marc Marquez basically just controlled the entire vibe. Lights out, clean launch, head down, and goodbye. No drama, no tire stress, just classic devastating Marc Marquez. It was his first win since coming back from those massive arm and foot injuries. It was a massive statement. Pedro Costa, he finished a strong second, and Bezecchi rode a super smart and calculated race to take third, stretching his championship lead over Martin to 20 points. Well, going to bed on Saturday, everything felt totally under control for Aprilia. Bezecchi was leading the title fight. Martin, he was right behind there. And while Marc was a problem, he was still far enough back in points to not be an immediate emergency. And then Sunday showed up with a steel chair. Lights out on Sunday, Marc Marquez gets a little bit of wheel spin off the line, but he uses the bike well to cover the inside, leading Acosta and Pecco into the first turn. Everything looked totally fine at the front, but right behind them, complete disaster. Jorge Martin, he gets a decent jump from 8th, but he carries way too much speed into the first corner. Remember that fresh tarmac that gives absolute zero grip? Yeah, his front tire tucked in and his Aprilia turned into a heat-seeking missile that plows straight into Marco Bezzecchi, his own teammate, the guy leading the World Championship, the exact man he's trying to hunt down for the title. Once Bezzecchi went down, the whole corner turned into a bowling alley. Fermin Aldiger, he got collected and crashed. Raul Fernandez, he went flying into the gravel. And Fabio Di Giannantonio got completely swept up in the mess too, but he remounted. 5 guys, 1 corner, 3 Aprilias completely wrecked before the race even started. This wasn't Ducati playing dirty or KTM forcing an error. This was Aprilia taking out Aprilia. You could just see the team bosses on the pit wall staring into spaces like their house just floated away in flood. Well, huge shout out to DJ though. The guy dragged his broken bike out of gravel, hopped back on, and spent the entire race fighting his way from dead last all the way back to 12th. That is pure grit. Look, let's be real. Jorge Martin, he didn't do this on purpose. He made a mistake. He lost the front, and he owned it. The second he got back to the paddock, he walked straight into Bezzecchi's garage, and he apologized straight to his face. Even the Aprilia boss, Massimo Rivola, he didn't hold back or try to hide behind corporate PR. He stood right in front of the cameras and said, "When you know the conditions are bad, you take it more easy. The fact we crash and we have another Aprilia or even 2 in the middle looks stupid." Rivola even went ahead and said he would have accepted a harsher penalty for this, for his own guy. At the end, the stewards gave Martin a double long lap penalty for the next race at Brno. And honestly, when you wipe out half of the field at turn 1, you can't really complain about that. But the real drama is what this does to the garage dynamic. Don't forget Jorge Martin, he's leaving Aprilia at the end of the year. And Marco Bezzecchi is their future. He basically married their bike. He's Italian, he's their star, and he's the guy they are basically building this whole project around. If, Marc, he starts chipping away this gap, we are looking at a brutal 3-way title fight. And if it comes down to the wire later this year, Aprilia has a very easy choice to make. Team orders are real in MotoGP, and a guy who's packing his bags in December, who already tried to leave them last year, and who has now put his teammate on the floor twice, is not going to get the full political backing from the factory. Martin has to win the strictly on raw speed now, because he's officially on his own. While all that chaos was destroying the midfield, the guys up front they gave us an absolute masterclass. Marc Marquez versus Pedro Acosta, the legendary champion who knows every mental trick in the book versus the guy who basically fears no one. On lap 2, Acosta dropped a gorgeous aggressive pass on Marc. Since he chose the softer tire, Pedro knew he had to break away early before Marc's medium tire warmed up and got into play. By lap 5, it looked brilliant. Costa had pulled 1.5 seconds gap and looked completely unstoppable. But Marc is terrifying because he never panics. He just sits there, tracks the gap, watches how the bike ahead is moving, and waits for your tires to fall off a cliff. By the halfway mark, the hunt was on. With 13 laps to go, Marc he threw his bike inside the chicane. Costa immediately tried to fight back. Marc tried again in the final corner, and Acosta he still refused to brake. This wasn't some polite podium cruise. These two were absolutely throwing hands at each other in Hungarian heat. And finally, on lap 14, Marc made a very clinical move, stick into turn 5. Second, he got ahead. You just knew it was over. The gap opened up. Costa's rear tire, it checked out. Marc, he crossed the line to take the victory. Well, we gotta give it to Pedro Costa because finishing second, it hurts. When you've led that many laps, when you've led the race for that many laps, but the guy rode his heart out. This wasn't KTM being the best bike on the grid. Other KTMs finished way back in 9th, 10th, and 15th. This was pure Pedro Costa talent. He was matching an all-time great. He's now got 13 podiums without a Premier Class win. But like his team manager Aki Ayo said after the race, that first Sunday victory is right around the corner. Then you have Paco Bagnaia. He crossed the line, a lonely 11 seconds behind in third. Paco was hilarious and brutally honest about it. He straight up said, "It wasn't my fight. After a few laps, I realized I couldn't even stay with them, so I let them go." He knew he got incredibly lucky at turn 1 because his bad start kept him out of the blast zone. It's his third podium in a row, which is great for his consistency, but finishing 11 seconds behind a guy who's on exact same machinery as you. He admitted, "I need to learn from Marc." That's gotta be a tough pill to swallow. Let's just let this number sink in for a second. 100 Grand Prix victories across all classes. Just think about that. That's not a stat, that's a monument. Only 2 other riders in the entire history of motorcycle racing ever done it: Valentino Rossi and Giacomo Agostini. Now Marc Marquez has officially joined the club. The timing, it's just unreal. Less than a month ago, the guy was getting surgery done on his shoulder and foot. 2 weeks ago, he was literally sitting in a hospital room with his brother Alex Marquez. Marc said it best after the race: "I'm happy to be back on the winning track. I hope this is my last comeback. I realized back in 2020 that a single day can change your life. The price was high, but it was worth it." Think about the sheer hell he's gone through since 2020 and get back to this point. He shows up at Balloton Park, a track where he's never lost, takes pole, wins the sprint, wins the Grand Prix, and simultaneously gives Ducati their 100th Premier Class win as well. Seriously, couldn't write a better script. And while the podium guys were celebrating, the midfield was an absolute dogfight. Well, shout out to Trackhouse Aprilia's Ayagura, who quietly dodged the turn 1 grenade and brought his bike back home in a brilliant 4th place. literally saving Aprilia's entire weekend single handedly. And Honda actually had a massive Sunday too, because Luca Marini he got fifth, and rookie sensation Diego Moreira he grabbed sixth. Moreira is a proper rookie, and showing that kind of maturity when veterans all around him are crashing outproves the kid is building something. But the real MVP of the midfield was Jack Miller. Jack had one of those classic rides that doesn't look much on paper, but if you actually watched it, the man was fighting for his absolute life. He qualified way back in 12th, and thanks to the turn 1 mess, he suddenly found himself up in 5th by the end of lap 1. Usually, what happens when you are on a slower bike? You inherit the position and you start dropping like a stone. But Jack, he said, absolutely not. For lap after lap, Jack turned his Yamaha into the widest motorcycle in the world. On a tight track like Balaton, if you place your bike perfectly, the guys behind you are just trapped. This wasn't polite defending, this was proper elbows out Jack Miller. Every single braking zone was calculated to completely ruin the rhythm whoever was behind him. Well, he eventually finished 8th, but that doesn't tell the story. He was the top Yamaha and he defended that position like his rent was drastically overdue. It was old school, aggressive, beautifully annoying Miller, and it was a total joy to watch. Now let's look at the points math because Hungary it completely broke the championship wide open. 2 rounds ago, Marquez he was sitting with 102 points deficit behind Marco Bezzecchi. Gap so big, you pretty much start packing it in for the next year. In one single weekend, 48 hours, he crawled back 30 points. Not because his bike suddenly got faster, because Aprilia imploded and he was ready to pounce. Aprilia is technically still fine on paper. Marco Bezzecchi has been the most consistent, smart rider on the grid all year long. But Marc Marquez, he just showed up like a villain in a horror movie who you thought was dead 20 minutes ago. He's now close enough to make everyone in that Aprilia garage sweat. And a sweating paddock is exactly where Marc is at his most dangerous. So that was the Hungarian Grand Prix. Aprilia came in with all the hype and left with a massive headache. Pedro Costa, he proved that he's a certified weapon. Jack Miller, he defended like his life depended on it. Honda got a rare reason to celebrate. And Marc Marquez, he made history. You can call it a comeback, call it vintage Marc, call it whatever you want. I call it a warning because if Aprilia they keep giving him gifts like this title race is going to get real weird, real fast. Well, next up is Bruno. Jorge Martin has a double long lap penalty waiting for him there. Aprilia has some incredibly awkward team meetings ahead, and the rest of the grid has one simple problem. Marc Marquez remembers exactly who is. If you enjoyed this video, hit that subscribe button, smash the like button, and drop a comment below. Tell me, is Marc actually back in this title fight, or does Bezzecchi have too much of a safety net to be caught? I'll see you guys at Bruno.